So hopefully, and I live in Harlem, got it. Well, hopefully those who are in business, and if you paid someone over $600 in 2017 to provide a service to your business, hopefully you got your 1099s out to those individuals. Or even if you paid commercial rent to someone, because you should issue a 1099 for commercial rent too. And if you paid an attorney, you should issue them a 1099 for legal fees. So there's several instances when you would issue someone a 1099. And oh, guess what? If you're an informant, I just learned this. If you're an informant and the government pays you to snitch, they're gonna give you a 1099. So you can get a 1099 for being a snitch. Let me find out. That's your job. That's your regular job. And that also means you're in business for yourself. So hopefully you got some expenses, some security or something, security expenses if you're going to be a snitch. All right. All right. So I'm going to get started. My name is Tuesday Brooks, and I operate an accounting firm here in Harlem, New York City. And we help small business owners, women in particular, set up bookkeeping systems, stay out of tax trouble, and plan for growth. And so that's our thing. And financial literacy, and especially as it pertains to business management, is really important to me. So I try to do as much as I can to help business owners navigate the whole financial side of their business. Here, I would like to introduce my staff. Say hi. The team, that's Shanice in the back. And there's Brittany. One of us are missing today. Our intern, she comes in later on, but she's an integral part of the office team, the Joy team. One thing I want to say, the information that I'm given today about employee versus contractor, it is general information, and I think it will be very helpful to you. So, but also I need you to understand that it is general information. So I don't want you, saying, oh, Tuesday told me I could do X, Y, and Z, and, and get yourself into trouble. Unless you and I speak directly, we have, one-on-one consultation so I can learn more about your business and the specifics of your business. Do you want to blame me? Okay, so it is general information. And with the IRS and the state regulations in terms of taxes, everything is a if, and but. There are always exclusions, there are restrictions, there are thresholds. So as much as they create rules and guidelines to follow, there's always exceptions to it. So I would need to know specifically what you got going on, what, the specifics of your business to help you in a very specific way. So let's jump in. Today's topic is employee versus contractor. I want to start with why this is important and why the IRS in particular makes a big deal about it. For many years, businesses have classified people who work for them as contractors as a way to avoid employer taxes. Being an employer, being a company that employs folks can be super expensive, especially if you're in New York, a state that has heavy taxation. So it gets expensive. You have to pay you have to withhold federal income tax out of their checks and send that over to the tax man. You have to pay for unemployment tax. You have to match your employees' Social Security and Medicare. You have to pay, if you're in a state that has state income tax, you have to withhold state income tax. You have to pay state unemployment insurance. You have to have a disability policy. I mean, there's so much. You have to have a workers' compensation policy as well. So there's so much involved with being an employer that it can be very, very expensive. So how easy is it not to consider that person an employee, consider them a contractor, and just give them their cash, give them a 1099, and send them on their way without paying all those taxes. And that's what companies were doing. But it is wrong. It is against the law, and you should not do it. You should not misclassify people who work for you for the sake of saving on taxes, because they're coming down on folks who do it. You end up having to pay back payroll taxes. Workers' comp will impose penalties and fees for the insurances that you didn't pay. So it gets really bad if you do this, especially if they can prove that you did it intentionally. So that is why this is an issue, because it's a less expensive way of having people help you in your business. But I'm advising you not to take this route. It would be much better to employ the people who are actually employees for your business. And it's the cost of doing business, right? It's the cost of doing business to have people help you pay the taxes, contribute to the economy. Hey, it is what it is. So now let's get into the differences. The IRS looks at three things that help them determine whether or not someone is an employee. And these three things, if you know what they are, it can help you determine too, from the onset, so there's no confusion. Understand that you won't look at each one of these things in isolation. So it's not just one thing that's going to determine it. It's the accrual, or is the accumulation of all these different elements that's going to determine whether someone is an employee and a contractor. So, yeah.
Should we have them guess?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think they would. No, Brittany's ambitious. She wanted y'all to guess what those were. Well, actually, had you watched my video on YouTube, you probably would have known the answer. By the way, I do have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search on my name, Tuesday Brooks, all of the different videos that has a lot of the same content that I talk about in the live sessions are on YouTube, especially if you want to go back and be reminded of some of what I said. So there are, by default, someone is your employee, but there are three criteria that they'll look at to determine whether or not. So that's behavioral control, financial relationship, and the relationship between the parties. So it's behavioral, it's financial aspects, and it's also the relationship between the parties. So first I'm going to start with behavioral. So someone comes to work for you, and you are telling them what time they need to be to work, or how many hours they need to work. You're telling them what you need them to do. You're giving them details on how you would like them to do it. You're giving them the tools to do it. And you're holding them accountable for those particular hours and that particular work. And you're intricately involved in how they're doing it. That's more than likely an employee, because you're exercising control over the outcome of whatever it is they're working on. And understand, if you have the right to exercise control over it, they are considered an employee, even if you don't do it. You could have an employee like I have, who they are amazing, and I don't have to, tell them a lot or, micromanage everything that they do, but they are still my employees, but because I have that right to do it. Okay. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is whether or not you evaluate them. If there's someone you're going to evaluate, then there's a good chance they're an employee. Whereas with contractors, they are in business for themselves, essentially, as an independent contractor. So you would retain them for the end result, right? If they're working on a marketing proposal or an advertising campaign or a sales strategy, and you say, this is what I want the end result to be, go for it. and they take off running and they do it. And that is probably an independent contractor for your business, especially if you're not telling them the hours they have to work. You're not telling them the methods to use. You're just simply relying on them to create an end result for you. So are there any questions? I forgot to mention, if you want to, ask me any questions as we're going along, I may not be able to read them because I already told you my eyes are challenged, but Shanice and Brittany could let me know if you asked a question, and I'll try to answer it as we go. Hey, Date Just 42. I know who you are. Hi, Natasha. Okay, so that is behavioral control. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about financial control. So what's the financial relationship between you and this person that's working for you? Are you paying them hourly? And a particular wage, or is it a flat fee? Now, if you're paying someone hourly for X number of hours, there's a good chance they're an employee. But of course, there's exceptions to that, right? Because attorneys, we often pay hourly. They don't get paid per project. So remember, every rule is not hard and fast. But generally speaking, if you're going to pay someone, an hourly wage, or you're going to call it a salary, then they are operating as an employee. Also, financial, if the person is an independent contractor, they are likely to absorb some of the financial, not burden, but they will absorb some of the financial costs to do their job, in other words, because they're a business, right? So if they have to travel somewhere to get the job done or buy certain supplies to get this job done for you, they are operating as a business and they're absorbing the expenses to get that job done, and you're not, right? So that would point to them being a contractor versus you paying for all of the supplies, you're paying for all of the travel, you're paying for everything that they need to get their job done. So that's one of the distinctions as well. Remember, if you have any questions, go ahead and answer it. So, and then the other thing is the period in which you are paying them. If you hire someone and the expectation is that they're going to work for you indefinitely, right, until they go on to another job or they need to be fired or, whatever happens, you anticipate them being there for a while. That's more of an employee relationship than an independent contract relationship, although there are still long-term independent contractor relationships as well. Okay, so you want to be very clear about how much time and how you're going to pay and who's going to, absorb some of the expenses for whatever the job is. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit about the relationship. So oftentimes, accountants and attorneys, when people are setting up employees or contractors in their business, they say, well, one of the ways you can get around classifying this person as a contractor is just have a contract, right? Have an agreement with them saying that they're an independent contractor to your business. But guess what? The IRS does not have to acknowledge that agreement. So even though it's a good thing to do, have an agreement in place, if that person is in fact your contractor, the IRS is not going to just rely on that to determine it. They're going to look at everything else to determine whether or not that person is truly an independent contractor. So that's one thing. So you want to be clear on the relationship if they are, and you want to be clear on everything else as too. And what are they doing in this relationship relative to the whole operations of the business? So if they're doing something that is key, let's say administrative work. If you hire someone to do administrative work for your business, it's likely that they need to be classified as an employee, not an independent contractor. I know there are several people who do this. They have someone working administratively, and maybe they think because the person's working remotely, not in their office or something like that, that they can classify them as a contractor. But the reality is what that person's role is to the business is very key. And they're working X number of hours and they have specific tasks they have to do to get the job done. So essentially, they can be construed as an employee versus a contractor. Okay, so I'm going to wait and see. Do we have any questions? Yeah, Big Chick said, just because you say someone is an independent contractor doesn't mean the IRS will classify them as such. Absolutely. And understand that you don't have a choice in it, right? There are guidelines that you need to follow that determine it. And I hear so often people say, oh, I hired, so everyone that works for me, they just said they want to be contractors. Well, it doesn't matter what they say. You're responsible as the business owner to determine the proper way to classify them prior to hiring them. And if they are truly an independent contractor, meaning they're in business for themselves, right? They're doing what they do for you, for other businesses like yours. That's another indication that someone's a contractor. Then it's your responsibility to get a W-9 from them, because now you're going to issue a 1099 to them, at the beginning of the subsequent year, saying how much you paid to them as an independent contractor. And then they're responsible for their own taxes. But if that person you hired is not in business for themselves, they don't have business cards, they are not doing this for other people, they're going to dedicate their time and their ability to your position and follow your lead on what needs to be done, then they are an employee. So you need to give them a W-2 or W-4 rather form to fill out. That's the equivalent. So that's the equivalent to the W-9. So if someone's a contractor, oh, I forgot to apologize in advance in case the phone rings because I'm in my office. So if they're a contractor, you give them a W-9 form at the beginning of the agreement, right? The relationship, so that you get their full name, their address, and either their social security or their tax ID number. If they're in business, if they have a separate tax ID number, you get that, because that's the information you're going to rely on to issue the 1099. If they are an employee, you're going to get them to fill out the W-4. Has the same information, their name, their full address, their social security number, and how many exemptions they want, because now you have to withhold tax out of their check. And then you're going to issue that to them. And I mean, they're going to issue it to you, and then you're going to rely on that to issue them their W-2 at the beginning of the subsequent year. Okay, so any questions? So, yeah, so you don't, I think my point that I was making is you don't really have a choice in it. You're going to determine the relationship based on, financial concerns, the behavioral concerns, and the relationship between you and that person, and you're going to determine what they truly are. Now, there's a form that can actually help you as well. It's called oh, that's so funny. You said they came for you. You said they came. Oh, because you misclassified, right? Oh my God, $18,000. Someone, the biz chick said, right, she had classified people who were working with her in a certain way, and they sent her a love letter for $18,000. So she had to prove her relationship with them in order to get some of that, penalty and stuff taken off. Thank goodness. I don't think you had to end up paying that whole thing, right? So here's a form that can help you. I think it's the SS8, right? And it brings you down a series of questions. You can get it at irs.gov. It brings you down a series of questions that will help you determine the relationship with you and that person. And you don't have to submit that form. You can if you want. If you want the IRS to determine that relationship of that person for you, just to make sure you're doing it right, you can actually submit that form and they will classify that person for you. Or you could just use it for internal purposes, fill out the questionnaire, tell that person, especially if they're insisting on being an independent contractor or something like that, tell them, say, look, no, every question we answered, you're an employee, so it is what it is, so I'm going to hire you as an employee. So that's something helpful. Any questions? So thank you. Glad it's helpful to someone. Okay, so I got the key takeaways here is There are guidelines, right? It's not what you want to do as a business owner. There are guidelines to follow that determines whether someone is an employee or independent contractor. However, you don't use any one of the guidelines in a vacuum. You have to look at everything to determine, because, like in the case of the attorney, if you say, well, if I pay this person hourly, they're my employee, but no, because we pay attorneys, hourly sometime. Or you can't just assume that an attorney is an independent contractor, because if a law firm hires an attorney, right, whatever work that attorney does, it's going to fall under that firm's work, right? So it's going to be projected as if that's the firm's work. So that attorney is actually an employee of that firm, okay? You have to weigh all of the factors, there's no magic, way of determining it. It's just really thinking about all of the different things I brought up. How much control are you exercising over this person? Or are you paying them for training? If you pay someone for training, there's a good chance that they're an employee, because in most cases, businesses are not going to pay for the training of one of their independent contractors. That contractor needs to take their training on their own, right? So that's another example. Can I give someone specific hours as a contractor? Interesting. So yes and no. So you can, if you arrange with that contractor, not a flat fee, but an hourly rate, then you can limit those hours, right? Because your budget can only withstand a certain amount. So you can say, well, I have, $8,000 to do this. So, don't go over X number of hours. So in that case, you can sort of restrict hours, and that doesn't make that person any less of a contractor. So you can give them a specific number of hours, but you wouldn't necessarily say, I need you to work on this between 10 and 5 every day, right? Because theoretically, they're in business for themselves. They may be doing other things between 10 and 5. As long as they get the job done, then that's all that matters to you. Because remember, the contractor relationship is you're more interested in the end result than you are the process in which they do it, or the hours that they do it. So that was a good question. So I think that's all I really had on this subject. Let me just look at my notes. The good news is, if you have been operating your business for some years and you're just realizing now that you are paying people as contractors and they're really employees, and you want to make good on that before, workers' comp or the federal or state government decide to audit you, you can actually voluntarily reclassify the people that you've paid in the past. And as long as you're not being audited, or you're not being, investigated by any of the tax agencies, they will abate or relieve you of some of the penalty and employer taxes if you voluntarily say, you know what, I'm just realizing I was doing this wrong, and I've consistently paid them as 1099s. That's the other thing. You have to show that you've been consistently paying them as 1099s, as contractors. So they want to see that, they want it to appear that you really thought you were doing the right thing and you were being accountable. It's just that you didn't classify them in the right way. And you'll get some relief if you voluntarily do it. Now, if you don't voluntarily do it, then, and they find out, then, it's a problem. So that's another thing. You can go to irs.gov and find out about voluntarily reclassifying your employees. And I think that's it. Oh yeah, another thing I didn't mention, and just in terms of a relationship, if you, say someone is a contractor, but then you offer them insurance, or give them a bonus, or give them vacation time, stuff like that. Give them parents of employee. Really, they're an employee and not a contractor. You wouldn't do those types of things. That's something they would take into consideration, what type of arrangement you have, financially with that person. So I think that's it. I would just say, if there's anything you want to be reminded of, you can always listen to this over again, or again, go to YouTube, where I wrote a song about this subject. No, it's not really a song, but there's a video about it, and other small business topics that, I feel may be helpful to you. And if we don't have any other questions, I think that would be all. You say what?
You said the link is in your bio?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The link is in the bio, and the Instagram, in my bio on Instagram. There's a link tree, and it has all of the different ways to contact us and to get other tax tips and information. Okay. So, bye, guys.